A doorway of stone opens for the sun once a year. Why here? And who taught the sky this trick? Take my hand and cross the grass to a gate that opens for daylight like a practice spell. We'll trace its quiet geometry and wonder aloud. Who set the sky its cue? The plain is quiet now, yet it is never truly silent, for chalk carries whispers, and the grass keeps the weight of every foot that has crossed it. Imagine the midnight dew beating on blades as fine as wire, a cold scent like crushed shell, and a sky pricked with such a scatter of stars that it seems some careful hand has sown them. In this darkness there is room to listen, and in listening we begin to know that the first monument here was not made of stone or timber or earth, but of attention itself. The people who came before us did not merely pass by. They saw, and in seeing they began to draw a long, pale grammar onto the land. The bones of this place are chalk, a seafloor lifted to air, a white comfort that digs easily and gleams when cut. It is soft and it is stubborn. Soft beneath an antler pick, stubborn in the way it outlives empires. Ask any old flint blade found along the furrows, and it will tell you that chalk remembers the shape of a trench, the curve of a post hole, the pressure of a heel pivoting to face the dawn. Underfoot lies a country of ghosts, not morbid but companionable, and the greatest kindness we can pay them is to step gently and speak plain. If the night has a color here, it is the slate blue of a heron crossing the moon, and if the night has a sound, it is the fine hiss of grass against the hem of a cloak. Long before the ring that draws pilgrims today, there were people who stood here and lifted tall pine into the sky. Imagine them at the end of the last ice age's long tail, around 8,000 years before the calendar you keep on your phone, setting great posts into pits that open like mouths in the chalk. Their tools are of bone and antler and flint. Their hands are strong in the way of those who lift their world by hand. No stone circle yet, no ditch or bank, just dark timber against the sky, and a question. What does it mean for a human to stand a tree upright in a cleared place? Perhaps it is a way to invite the spirits of wood into the openness of the plain, to stitch a forest memory into an ocean of grass. These Mesolithic posts, now lost to rot and memory, lie beneath modern car parks and roads, a reminder that our conveniences are always raised on someone else's ceremony. Archaeologists speak softly of them because soft speech suits old things. They map the hollows, measure the stain of ancient humus in white soil, and raise from these slight traces a picture of people who return to the same places over and over as families return to a favored bend of river. The spring at Blickmead, not far from the stone circle's later heart, was a place like that, a persistent eye of water where winter does not bite so hard and the world makes room for fire, food, and story. Bones of aurochs and deer, pins and flakes, and the smell of wet earth. Such details are like threads. Pull lightly and a pattern shows. The river in this story is the Avon, silver and certain, curling from chalk to sea, a companion and a guide, its banks lined with reeds that laugh when the wind asks a joke. Only reeds understand. To reach the river from the high ground is to pass through grades of quiet, from open wind to sheltered willow, from chalk underfoot to mud, from speech to gesture as hands become busy with nets and spears. The river is a teacher of lines, the line of its current, the line of the fish bones in ash. The line people will someday cut across the land in mimicry and in answer. When you kneel to drink, you see the stars upside down and blurred. When you drink again, the sky seems inside you. Such things matter to people who make meaning with care, and meaning in this landscape takes the form of paths. Time goes on, and the toolkit changes, and so do the houses and the festivals and the way people relate to the dead. We ease into the early Neolithic, the age when farming's tether draws tighter and fields are coaxed from the wild. The plain receives long barrows like the first lines of a poem laid down with a steady hand. These mounds, spine-bright and clean in dawn light, are not simply graves, but houses of forebears, places where bones learn to live together in the dark. The doors of some are shut and sealed, others remain open for seasons, for sorting and touching and speaking names when the veil grows thin. The living kneel at thresholds and remember that to keep the dead close is to keep a compass in the body. Along with the barrows come enclosures like questions scratched round in chalk, ovals whose banks and ditches define an inside and an outside, causeways that cut and do not cut, lines that allow a procession to move in rhythm. These causewayed enclosures, airy and peripheral, are not fortresses, but meeting places, fairs of exchange and marriage, sites for lawful talk and unlawful possibility. From the air, if you could fly with the red kites, you would see how these ovals nest in hills, as if they seek sight lines to one another, as if one enclosure is answering another in a call and response across miles. Then, draw a breath. The paragraph itself asks for it. Comes a line so long, your eyes want to follow it like a child follows a finger. The Stonehenge cursus is cut not as a circle, but as a rectangle with rounded ends, a vast chalk avenue laid almost 3 kilometers across the land like a sentence that knows its verb is still to come. Its banks are low now, its ditch shallow, a pale scar most days invisible from ground level, but the act of cutting was the act of speaking. When you walk along its axis at night, the stars turn their great mill overhead, and you feel in your thighs the rhythm of a people learning to make a straight thought manifest on a generous scale. Why a line? Perhaps to rehearse the discipline needed later to set a circle true. Perhaps to measure something beyond weather and season, to keep a bargain with horizon and star. Perhaps it was a path for the dead, a way to accompany them from one place to another with formal care. Archaeologists will tell you what they can. The ditch runs here, its terminals are there, the radiocarbon dates fall within these brackets, flint napping stations are present, animal bones are scarce. But the people who cut it could have given you a song. When you are very still, you can almost hear it, a refrain with a deliberate beat, fit for walking, as if every footfall makes a promise. We will remember. The plain's geography cooperates with meaning like a friend who knows when to offer a hand. The long, gentle rises, the smooth shelves of chalk, the easy digging, these are advantages if you wish to write in huge strokes. The wind clears sound across distance, carrying drum and voice farther than you would expect, and the sky is a dome free of obstacles, making dawn and dusk precise, reliable, legible to the naked eye. To stand here is to be addressed, and people answer in structures. The dark presence of old woods clings to the edges, but the center is ringed with intention. Paths converge, and it becomes natural to ask for an arrangement that brings such convergence into an embrace. And yet, for all those arrangements, this is still a place of walking, not settling. The big village comes later, and not exactly here. For now, what gathers on the plain are small groups who know they are part of something stretched beyond their fire's radius. A woman with a flint at her belt and a child on her hip learns the sky with her eyes and the ground with her soles. A man mends a sledge runner, a youth tests a bone pin by pushing it through thick leather and nods when it slides clean. They talk about weather, yes, but they also talk about directions like relations. The north that brings hard wind, the east where dawn keeps its promise, the far west of dreamed seas, the south whose warmth is a rumor delivered by migrating birds. There are nights when fog lays low and you cannot see a body's length in front of you. And there are nights like this one, clear, exact, when the horizon behaves like a line a finger could draw. On such nights the elders tell how the world thins, and the ancestors, kept in their long barrows with order and tenderness, lean near the skin of the living. A grandson places a small gift, polished bone, a shell from the coast, a seed. Someone sings with a voice that prefers descending notes. Someone else listens as if the ground itself were speaking. In this way, knowledge is fed like a fire. You add long pieces to make it through night. When dawn stains the east, the barrows do not diminish. They reveal their purpose, bright humps casting long blue shadows. After the day's chores, tending animals, scraping hides, grinding grain, mending nets, the people climb the barrows not to conquer them, but to consider. What shape will hold us together? What path will carry us most truly from river to high ground? They experiment with chalk and timber, with openings and closures, with feasts and fasts, with the placing of fires, so that smoke stains the right stones at the right times of year. These are tried and tested and altered and tried again until they are sure that the land agrees. In time, the places you return to return the favor. They begin to gather you. A causeway becomes a habit becomes a story becomes a law. The plain's edge blooms with more barrows, each a syllable in a steady chant that honors bone and kin. The rivers receive gifts that rattle and gleam. A line is cut deeper, an enclosure is redug, a post is set, and then replaced. From Preseli's distant upland across the sea, slate-blue bluestones dream of walking. In West Woods, great sarsens, though unconceived of here as future lintels, drowse under cover of leaves, their bellies pressed to earth. The plain does not yet know these names, but it senses their approach the way a sleeper feels the dawn behind closed eyes. This is a story of patience, and patience is political in communities without kings. You do not move huge stones, or even the idea of huge stones, without first rehearsing the chords of cooperation until they are muscle memory. Before the megaliths, then, come the meetings. Circle dances that teach rhythm, shared hunts that teach distribution, marriages that tie distant families into usefulness, gifts that move along lines like rivers. The plain learns to hold a crowd without breaking. The ditch that will be dug soon is imagined first as lines of bodies walking with purpose and stopping as if on cue, the silence between drum beats as important as the beats themselves. The archaeology of absence is generous here. There are places where the digging tells of a once-stood timber that is long gone, of an entrance that no longer opens, of a path that the plow has softened into anonymity. From absence, good scholars coax presence with humility. They handle antler picks whose tips are beveled with use, smell the damp chalk, press the soil lightly, and feel differences that register more in finger memory than in sight. They sift ash and find fragments of bone burned to whitening, evidence of fires that were hot and purposeful. The past's grammar is not lost. It is hidden in syntax we have to rediscover with patience and a little love. In a low field stands a coppiced hazel whose branches radiate like the ribs of a basket. Imagine a woman taking such a rod and bending it into a hoop, a form that suggests a circle's power long before stone will express it. She binds a second hoop at right angles to the first, makes a frame for a net, and the net catches fish that turn a dull silver in the moon. Her son asks why circles, and she shrugs and says, because they keep and they share. He does not understand yet, but he will when midwinter later threads a straight line between uprights and his breath rises like smoke in the doorway of an idea. Look north, and you might picture, though you cannot yet see, the circles of timber that will once stand at Durrington Walls, warm with life and grease and laughter. But tonight we are on higher ground, and what we see is tranquility, seasoned with anticipation. There is an echo in the land, an echo of order. The long axis of the cursus is a promise without words. The barrows are vows whispered to kin. The river is a courier, the wind an omen, the stars a ledger that never lies. People move along paths with the certainty of those who have walked them many times in festival seasons, and their certainty is a kind of joy. The plains chalk is not simply white. In it we find tiny fossils, sea lilies, shells, that catch moonlight when turned in the hand. Children learn to search for them, and in learning they practice the archaeology of their own future. They line the found shapes along the bank of a ditch, a row of ancient sea against the modern night. An elder smiles and tells a tale about a time before time when all this was water, and the children listen with eyes wide because water and stone together sounds like truth. The elder does not know words like stratigraphy, but knows what matters. That layers hold stories, and that stories hold us. Now think of hands. The stout hands of diggers, the nimble hands of weavers, the careful hands of those who tend fire, and those who tend bone. A community is a choreography of hands before it is anything else. In the long Neolithic evenings, hands practice knots, the kind that will someday hold sledges and lintels as if by a promise. Knots are tidy magic, a form that is both visible and hidden, open and closed, flexible and firm. They teach what a circle teaches. When an old woman shows a child how to unpick a knot without hurting the cord, she is giving a lesson in governance. We have passed the barrows and walked the length of the old cursus, and now the hill ahead is a shoulder against the sky, and at its base a small clearing reads like a paragraph, break in the long text of the land. Here the ground is level, the drainage is kind, the horizon is fair. Walk it in silence, and you will feel the rightness accumulate. If a place can agree, this one agrees. It is like a held breath. Even the owls seem to fly more carefully, as if not to bruise the air. There is talk in the camp of making a new kind of place, neither house of the dead nor simple field of gathering, not a line and not a mound, but something that can hold all those meanings at once without confusion. Some elders are cautious. Caution keeps children alive. Some young ones are bold. Boldness feeds the story. Between them, a consensus takes shape, and it is practical in its poetry. First, they will define the ground, mark a boundary that invites rather than forbids, teach the feet where to pause and where to pass. The tools are already in hand: antler, bone, flint. The method is already rehearsed: dig, pile, smooth, and attend. We sit on our heels and listen to the talk, though we are visitors and cannot quite enter the circle of authority. The old ones speak about entrances that face the light, about how a path should meet a bank so that a procession flows like water, about where to place fire so smoke rises out rather than in. They argue gently over measures and come to agreement with laughter. Somewhere in the dark, a child falls asleep against a mother's knee, and that sleep is a blessing on the plan. Somewhere else, a small bird calls twice and is quiet, as if offering an amen. The chalk will accept a ditch, and the ditch will give a bank, and together they will make a circle of earth that is not a wall, but a frame for actions. The first season's work will be hard but beautiful, and many hands will mean many stories later, stories that anchor a community in its own past. When they dig, they will save the best chalk for the crest, so it gleams, and even under cloud the bank will glow faintly, as if storing daylight. Around the bank, the grass will grow again, and where feet beat a path, the ground will darken and soften and carry the print of ritual. While we wait for that first bite of the pick into chalk, our senses sharpen to the night's texture. The smell of wood smoke laps like a shawl around shoulders. The taste of cold water is the taste of a spring shared with generations we will never meet. The air is full of the sympathetic magic of intent, that bright state when a community agrees to do a difficult thing together. Some sit tracing circles in the dust. Some count on their fingers the days to a festival. Some stare into the distance as if they can already see stones where there are none. A fox steps from shadow and watches us with the blank knowledge of animals. It blinks and is gone. In the trees, a late leaf flips its underside to the moon and then turns back. Far off, a deer stamps once, and the sound is exactly like a soft mallet on a taut drum. The world is full of signals if you are trained to receive them, but this is not superstition. It is a way of being attentive that has kept small groups alive through large winters. The plain rewards such attention by permitting its secrets to be learned gradually and without violence. As our night lengthens, we let our breath match the breath of the place. In for the chalk's coolness, out for the river's sheen. The longer we sit, the more we feel the continuity of effort across centuries, and the less spectacular it seems that a circle of earth or stone could be raised. A person lifts, a person ties, a person sings, a person rests, and then the person lifts again. Repetition is not tedium in such work, it is devotion. When at last a bank stands and a ditch lies pure and white, there will be applause in the heart more than in the hand. Before that first day of digging, there is one more thing to say about the people who will do the digging. They are practical mystics. They have reasons to eat and reasons to pray and reasons to be ambitious for beauty. They wish for safety for children and for a steady harvest, but also for moments when the world seems to open and the sun and the land and the human body align so precisely that every ordinary sorrow is briefly forgiven. They are not unlike us. They are not perfect, and sometimes they quarrel, but they have built a culture where the tools of quarrel are kept blunt and the tools of making are kept sharp. When you stand, your knees remember the cold ground as an intimacy rather than an inconvenience. Walk once around the clearing, and you will notice a faint rise that might be nothing and might be everything. On the second walk, it is more obvious. On the third, it is a decision. By the time dawn comes, the place for a bank and ditch has been chosen, though none have yet lifted a pick. Decision is its own architecture. Even the low clouds that drift over the horizon seem to take their cue and arrange themselves like a lintel over pale uprights. Now the east is graying in a fine line, and the stars step back with courtly bows. A bird begins a thread of song that will soon become a fabric. The people stir, stretch, and eat in quiet, a calm before a chosen labor. Antler racks are inspected, their tines polished by use. Baskets are shrugged onto backs. Children are bundled with grandmothers where the wind is least. Men and women take up positions not by rank, but by fitness and habit. When the first pick enters chalk, it will be the sound of a plan becoming a place. Stand with me on the edge of that moment and feel the centuries lean forward to watch. The plain is ready. The river waits with a slow smile. The barrows hold their counsel and do not mind that attention has shifted. A line that crosses the land, the old cursus, inclines to a new conversation. And somewhere, in a wooded distance, stones in their beds of earth begin to dream restless dreams, though their waking is still a lifetime away. The breath we draw now is the breath before making. Listen. Dawn takes a longer breath, as if to steady itself for a great note, and the chalk places itself under the poised antler like a pupil under a teacher's eye. In a few heartbeats there will be a nick, then a crescent, then a cup, then a trench that runs like a pale ribbon. Around it a bank will rise, and the circle will be born not yet of rock, but of intention, earth, and ash. For now, in this perfect pause, we stand in the last moment of the dreaming plain, and the first stroke waits like a held word on the tongue. A circle of earth and ash day comes pale and deliberate, a thin wash of light laid over the chalk, like milk over a slab of slate, and in that hush the first antler pick drops into the earth with the intimate sound of a secret being told. The blow is not loud, but it rings through bodies and down tendons, because when intention touches ground, even the quietest strike is a bell. The chalk yields in curls and crumbs, cold, fine, and strangely sweet-smelling. A kind of breath the earth returns as if relieved to be asked. There is a rhythm to the work from the very first hour. Raise the pick, set the point, drive, lever, lift the loosened pail, clear it to the side. The rhythm is human scale and merciful, made of efforts that are long but know their limits. Children watch and learn the count. 1, 2, 3. And the bank begins as a promise not yet shaped, but unmistakably real. They are making a circle without stones, a ring defined by negative space and luminous spoil, the inward ditch clean and white, the outward bank growing like a slow wave about to break. For a long while there will be no monoliths, only the earth resaid in another grammar, yet already the place holds attention the way the moon holds tide. The workers sort themselves by habit rather than command. Some cut, some carry, some pare the walls of the trench with flint blades to a neat smoothness that pleases both hand and eye. Others walk the perimeter, marking with stakes the mouth of a future entrance, where the slope from outside to inside will be gentle enough for processions and for the elderly who must be honored even in the bustle of a rite. The shape they draw is near perfect, with a northeast gap that will become the favored door, as if the circle itself wishes to greet a morning from that corner of the sky. The ditch lengthens in bites, its sides nearly vertical, where chalk behaves well, its base rounded by the persuasion of water that will sometimes pool and sometimes vanish. Spoil goes outward to make the bank, an arrangement that looks backward to enclosure and forward to welcome. Those who are outside see something rising. Those who step inward find a white path that draws them to the center. This is what scholars later will call a henge, with ditch inside and bank outside, a paradox of protection that does not close but gathers. The builders need no term for it. They have the feeling in their bodies, the sense of crossing a threshold, the quiet surprise of finding that inside a circle can feel larger than the open land. Work continues through days and into weeks, though the telling makes a braid of time so that you feel the continuity more than the calendar. On some mornings, thin rain stipples the chalk until the ditch is slick, and hands must be careful. On others, a hard sun exaggerates shadows, so the bank looks higher than it is. People eat when hungry and rest when wise. The hardness in shoulders becomes a new steadiness, and feet learn the circuit so well that they find their own way, even in darkness. Laughter punctuates effort in bursts, because making together unlocks a kind of joy. There are small injuries, a split nail, a nicked knuckle, and large kindnesses, someone's cloak spread in shade for a child's nap, a piece of sweet root pressed into a tired palm. As the ring grows, the plain tells them what it thinks. The soil's bright color lifts the mood even in grim weather, and the bank glows faintly at dusk so that it is easy to see the curve without torches. The ditch's white floor makes anyone who walks it shine. This brightness is not a vanity, it is a device for precision. When the time comes for ritual, nothing in the circle will be vague. Every step will be measured against this light. If the weather is kind, they cut the sides smooth. If it is not, they will return to tidy after rain. Some say you should leave a little roughness so the earth has its say. Others insist the ditch must look like a long-held breath. Conversation like this keeps the edge of the tools keen. The entrances take shape as causeways, firm and deliberate. At the northeast, the mouth that eyes the light of summer's height, workers leave the ditch uncut to form a crossing where hundreds can pass without breaking stride, where carts can rattle when there are carts, where the procession can keep its music unbroken. A smaller opening faces the south, a thoughtful opposite, a release for bodies and smoke, and the quiet dispersal after rites. When you stand between the two and look along the chord of the circle's heart, you feel the land align in a way that is not strict geometry, but something friendlier, like a handshake. If the alignment is not yet the perfect tuning that stones will later teach, it is a declaration that the sky's story is already in mind. Camps swell around the work, hearths multiplying like stars in puddles. People come for days or for a season and then go, replaced by cousins and friends from the same valleys, the same coasts, the same uplands. The plain is a parliament of accents. Necklaces tell stories of chalkland and riverbank, of granite country and sea edge. Beads of bone and jet sit beside shell brought over water. The gleam of a polished pebble from a far stream is a signal and a boast. Some visitors bring fine antler already shaped. Others bring flint with a color you do not see here. Yet the most precious contribution is hands and the willingness to listen when someone says, "Here, lift, now." Toward the inner edge of the new bank, they set a ring of shallow pits that will be remembered by another age and named for a different kind of maker. For now, the people who dig these cups in the chalk think of them as a near circle of places, measured by pacing and by eye, a constellation close to the bank's inside face. The number settles at 56, not by calculation, but by a calm rightness felt in the legs, a distance between one and the next that pleases the body. They dig them quickly, and backfill some as quickly, as if they are about rhythm as much as storage, as if the act of making the holes and closing them again is part of the rite. Centuries later, a careful soul will walk this circle with eyes like a measuring instrument and hands eager to sketch. John Aubrey, the attentive antiquary. He will notice these scars in the white earth where posts or deposits once sat. He will trace them in his notebook as you might trace freckles on a beloved shoulder, and in tracing he will return them to speech. But in the moment of their making, the people who cut them do not need a name. They fill some with ash and small things that the living handle and the dead deserve, and they leave some empty as if for breath, as if holes can be lungs. The work of a pyre is a sober art, and it is part of this phase's meaning. The cemetery that grows in and around the circle is a place of flame, and the fire is not careless, but studied. There is wood to cut and stack, a frame to build that ensures hot airflows, and bones calcined to a fine white that will not stain the chalk when scattered. There is a laying out of the body that is reverent without being stiff. The dead are familiar and still present. There is waiting while the fire eats, a waiting long enough for stories to be told, for silence to be kept, for tears to dry on their own. When the fire collapses, people lift what remains onto stone or into bowls, pick out the metal that has survived, if any, and then grind or sift until the fragments are ready to be given back. Cremation here is not an end, but a change of state, and the circle receives this change as part of its breath. Ash and bone are laid into some of the holes along the inner bank, into niches in the ditch wall, into small pockets like kisses beneath the turf, into places chosen by those who knew the dead best. Children's tiny tokens lie beside the fine curved shards of an elder's ribs. A woman's thumb bone, burned to chalk's whiteness, rests near a flake of a man's jaw. Some deposits are solitary, others layered, as if kin wish their remains to speak to one another in the earth. Later posts may be set where earlier remains lie. Earlier posts may be removed to make room for later ash. This overlapping has no confusion. It is a patience that carries family feeling across years. Those who mourn do not hurry. There is a rite for the day of burning, a processional entry from the northeast gap, the carrying of kindling and the body, and the water that will be heated for washing after. There is a rite for the cooling of the pyre, when the circle empties and only those who tended the dead remain to move coals into patterns with long sticks. There is a rite for the deposition itself, and it is a quieter, more precise ceremony than the burning, with few words and no drums. And then there is the third rite, unspoken yet understood, the return in later seasons and later years to sit over the deposit and hum a private melody that warms the psalter of memory. In the evenings between work and rite, there is talk of the circle's purpose, but the talk is not argument so much as careful rummaging in a chest of meanings that are meant to be used together. The ring defines an inside so that sacrifices and speeches do not drift away. The ring makes a theater for the sky so that the rising sun or a notable moon may be greeted without confusion. The ring unites the scattered family of barrows and enclosures, giving them a center where they can be understood as one intention. The ring gives the dead a home among the living without pushing the living too near their own terror of ending. No one explanation cancels the others. The circle is generous enough to hold all. By the time high summer comes, the ditch gleams like a necklace dropped in the grass, and the bank is smooth enough that children roll down it shrieking and are scolded and then forgiven, because joy, too, is a way to dedicate a place. People sweep the interior with brooms of twig, taking pride in the tidiness as if they have been swept themselves. Fires placed along the inner rim send a mild smoke that keeps gnats from the faces of elders chosen to speak. The space breathes, and the first time 100 bodies step through the northeast entrance in unison, something larger than the sum of them arrives and stands among them, invisible but appreciable, like the feeling of rain before a drop falls. On one such day, a small matter of engineering becomes a parable. The ditch wall near the south entrance slumps after heavy rain because the chalk there is cut too steep. A portion collapses, sending a miniature avalanche down into its own depth. Some are dismayed, but an elder smiles and says that the land has its own grace and will not be bullied, and the repair is done with humility and an added measure of slope. The story travels around the camp quickly. The circle is teaching us how it wishes to be held. That lesson will be remembered when later generations lift stones and must judge the tolerance between upright and lintel, not by pride, but by patience. Night within the circle is different from night without. Perhaps the bank muffles the wind a little. Perhaps the ditch drinks sound. Perhaps the white underfoot sends a gentler light upward. However it is, those who sing at night here sing lower, and the stars, when they climb the rim, seem to pause as if stepping over a threshold they respect. In such stillness, a woman whose brother's remains lie in a near hole lays a hand on the chalk and speaks softly to him. She does not believe he hears her as a separate being with ears and attention. She believes the world is a whole fabric and speech moves along threads. Her calm is a kind of science. There is an argument, soft and brief, about whether the ring of holes by the bank should hold posts. Some elders remember the first weeks when baskets of chalk were set into them and then tamped tight, the act comprehensive enough to be an offering without need for timber. Others like the thought of a circle of uprights, not tall, just enough to set a rhythm of shadows around the interior, to be lamps for the mind. They try it both ways in different portions of the ring across seasons. The clarity of results does not matter as much as the communal practice of decision, which is to say that the circle continues to be an instrument for teaching people how to be with people. Across the northeast entrance sits a large stone, not yet honored, as it will later be, half buried and stubborn, a creature of this land rather than a traveler from afar. It is rough, its skin pitted by weather, its presence that of a witness not yet called to the stand. Children climb it, then slide down, scattering chalk dust. Old men lean against it and nod through a story they have told too often. Women set baskets on its shoulder while they adjust belts. One year, someone digs a neat ditch around its base as if to greet it, as if to say, "We see you." It will be named in ages to come for a part of the body that steps out in greeting, and its relationship with the door of the circle will grow into a geometry of meaning. But for now it is only a natural sarsen, an accent stone in a sentence of earth. And always the cremations continue, quiet, careful, significant. A young man who died on a hunt is burned with the spear point that broke. A grandmother is given to flame with the delicate pins that once closed her hair. A child's small weight is a great weight on the hearts of those who carry the stretcher, and the fire that receives her burns with a steadiness that feels like mercy. The dead are not interred in rows like a ledger, nor piled like a heap of spent things. They are placed according to kin and to a choreography that balances grief with grace. Later, when we count, it will seem a number too large to hold without weeping, but in the season of its making, each deposit is singular and properly tended. Visitors who come from far coasts learn the habit of the place quickly. Even strangers know to pause at the bank, to let their breath settle before entering, to walk the ditch if invited, to step lightly on the chalk. If they have lost someone, they bring a token and ask to lay it at the hole that seems most welcoming. And the answer is usually yes, because generosity is the binding agent of a circle like this. In return, they give the only gift that matters, a story from their own path, a knowledge of tides, a song for guiding boats at dusk, a method for cutting a more resilient pick tine from antler, a way of seasoning meat for winter. The ring is becoming a school without blackboard or book, a place where learning has the exact weight of a shared task. By late autumn, the bank is tufted with new grass, and the ditch wears labels of frost on mornings after a clear night. Frost outlines the footprints of those who walk the interior, then softens when the sun looks over the rim. It is a good season for funerals in this culture, a season when generosity is remembered and obligations are sharpened. One evening, under a sky pale with thin cloud, the people perform a rite of gratitude, not for the dead, but for the tools that have done this work. Picks are laid in a line like a row of ribs. Their points are touched by hands that know them. A singer's voice does not rise but extends, long notes linked by breaths that seem shared among all present. Then the tools are taken up again and slung as if they are part of the body. The interior ground is firm and ready for uses that will change over centuries. For now, those uses are chalk and ash and the human voice. A leader, not a king, more a convener, stands in the center and speaks about the coming winter and the need to store food higher from damp, to share out the smoked meat fairly, to keep firewood nearer the shelters where elders sleep. There is a murmur of agreement that sounds like bees in a hedgerow. Then a woman whose mother was burned here in summer steps forward with a bowl of white crumbs and sifts them through her fingers into the grass. She does not look around to see who sees. She does not need to. The circle is made for such acts to be witnessed without hurry. How long does this phase last? Long enough for children who watched the first strike of antler into chalk to grow into the strength to strike by themselves. Long enough for the white of the ditch to dull a little where it is not tended. Long enough for the bank to be renewed more than once, with fresh chalk carried in baskets when a festival approaches and pride requires the place to shine. In the quiet arithmetic of seasons, long enough that the practice of cremation turns from novelty to tradition, and from tradition to a way of thinking about what it means to be a person among persons, briefly singular, then carefully commingled. Along the inner slope of the bank, where the holes lie like a necklace with some beads full and some beads empty, there is a debate about the all-important matter of spacing. The spacing was right at first by feel. Now newcomers see distances with new eyes and ask if 2 holes might be added to even the rhythm. The elders resist. 56, for reasons the elders cannot fully articulate, is right. Some say the number corresponds to a count of days they keep privately when watching the wanderings of the moon. Some say it simply agrees with the gait of their walking. They keep it as it is, which is to say, they keep the music of their circle steady. At last a morning arrives with a light that makes edges sharp, and someone standing in the northeast entrance feels, the word is right, a long chord strummed between earth and sky. The sun clears the far horizon and slides into the doorway, like a key into a well-used lock. And though the fit is not engineered to the hair's breadth that later will be achieved with stone, the sensation is of intention meeting its proper object. A murmur rises that is not applause, but release. The circle made of earth has proved itself an instrument for speaking with light. People look at one another and know without speaking that the experiment has worked and that bolder experiments are now permitted. In that permission lies the seed of future audacity. A few among them have walked in other lands where upright stones stand in rough rings, not unlike fence posts grown stubborn, and their eyes have widened. A few know the feel of rock that does not belong to chalk country, dense, fine-grained, damp to the touch, even in drought, and their hands have itched. A few dream in winter of a circle that can ring a sentence in stone the way this one rings it in earth and ash. They do not yet know where such stones will be found in numbers or how they will be moved, but they have learned patience and cooperation, and those are the only tools needed at the beginning of any large ambition. For now, however, the people sleep content in the knowledge that they have taught the plain a new language. They have kept faith with ancestors by bringing them into the circle's breath. They have kept faith with the living by making a place where speech can be heard and arguments can be resolved in view of a horizon that humbles boast. They have kept faith with the sky by making an aisle for light to walk down on certain mornings and certain evenings, a choreography for something larger than any one voice. They fold their blankets, bank their fires, and keep watch in turns, as if the circle were a child who must not be left alone on its first nights. When snow comes, and it does, thin on the wind, like chalk shaken from an invisible basket, the circle becomes itself in a new register. The bank shades to pearl, the ditch goes blue in shadow, footprints write letters that any hunter can read. A fox crosses at the northeast and pauses as if to consider the meaning of entrances. Then it drops into the ditch and trots along the pale, a russet punctuation mark in a white sentence, and climbs out at the south gap without breaking stride. Someone watching smiles and thinks, "The animal has learned our grammar quicker than we learned the animals." By spring, flowers dare the bank, small whites and yellows first, then the shock of blue that comes only for a week and then is gone. Children pick them and put them behind ears until someone shows them how to leave most blossoms for bees. The ditch holds water for a day after heavy rain and then releases it, a sure sign that this will be a forgiving place for a gathering on ground that will not become a trap for feet. A woman of 50 summers steps down into the ditch and paces its low white road from entrance to entrance. And when she climbs back out, her face is bright because she has felt in her calves the exact distance, and she knows in her breath the time it takes to cross when speaking a certain story. The circle is teaching timing now, not just shape. And then, one evening, a rumor arrives on the backs of men who have walked far and crossed water. They speak of hills of dark stone at the edge of a sea, of outcrops that ring when struck, of rock that holds a color like a bruise and a music like a pot rim flicked with a finger. They speak of quarries that are not pits, but faces of cliff that invite removal. They speak of stones that are heavy, but that will move if asked with the right combination of rope and rollers and song. The listeners are quiet, for this rumor slips easily into a space in the heart that has been waiting for it since the first ditch was cut. The circle has been ready for a companion, the cool permanence of rock to answer the warm impermanence of ash. No one shouts. The scale of the thought prohibits noise. Instead, there is that collective breath again, the circle's favorite music. And then people look toward the river because they suddenly see not just water, but a road. Eyes, once focused on white chalk rising in baskets, now sharpened toward a line that might be drawn from far western uplands to this pale ring. Heads tilt as if hearing, in a register too low for speech, the shuffle of distant stones beginning to stir. Those who know boats look at one another with a quick smile that does not need a word. Those who know knots flex fingers. Those who know how to feed 100 mouths watch the weather and make lists in their minds. It is not that they are leaving this place of earth and ash behind. It is that they are about to give it a voice capable of carrying farther than wind. The plain has seen the first act of a long drama and understands that intervals make the music. The ditch, the bank, the ring of holes near the inner lip, the careful fire, the sifted bone. These will remain honored and tended. But beyond the northeast entrance, beyond the rough old stone that leans and listens, beyond the line of the cursus and the barrows' patient shoulders, there is a path to water, and a path from water to sea, and on that path somewhere a thought has already begun to walk. When night returns and the stars lift their cold fires over the rim, the circle waits with a composure it has earned, knowing that in patience the next chapter will find it. Night settled softly over the bank of earth and the white ditch, and the rumor that had arrived as a breath grew into a plan with legs. The circle of chalk and ash had taught a people how to act as one. Now it asked whether a community could convince distant hills to lend their dark hearts. It began with listening, not to thunder or to prophecy, but to craft talk spoken low by those who knew wood, rope, ballast, and wind. The elders did not proclaim. They nodded. The young did not shout. They tightened belts. A path drew itself westward in the mind like a line of pale moths over water, and in the mornings strong hands woke to find their fingers already rehearsing knots. To reach the stones that had been described, you must go where the land rises in slow blue whalebacks and the wind tastes of salt and heather. The Prehistoric hills wait there, not jagged but firm, their flanks feathered with gorse and thorn, their spines wet with old springs. Here, rock stands near the skin of the world. The people who came from chalk country felt the ground change beneath their feet, the white crunch replaced by a darker resilience, and knew they were in a different chapter of the earth's book. They asked directions in the currency of kindness and news. They traded shell for pigment, rope for meat, songs for shelter. And one morning, when cloud tore off the ridge like combed wool, they stood before a face of rock that rang when touched, a sound small but convincing, like the chime of a pot lip. The men and women who read stone the way others read bark pointed and spoke of Carn Gorug, where spotted dolerite lies in tall pillars as if grown for lifting. The pillars are not tidy, but they are long and straight enough to tempt patience, stacked by geologic time into a puzzle of gravity and fracture. Those who read saw benches cut by frost, ledges where scaffolds could sit, fissures that would take a wedge made of wood that swells when wetted. They saw platforms where a stone could be eased onto a sledge without tumbling. These are not fantasies. They are careful inferences written into the rock's own scars. A little farther off, in a fold where a stream laughs at its own cleverness, Craig Rhos-y-felin offered rhyolite, its texture finer, its face marked by joint lines that promise a clean persuasion. Later minds, with microscopes and patience, would match thin slices of these rocks to the little blue-gray strangers at the chalkland circle. The people here needed only the feel in their palms and the sense that the stone would answer when asked. Before taking, they learned, a stone is not plucked, it is courted. They traced cracks with fingers, tapped with river cobbles or antler to hear the note, felt for frost wedges, and listened for the telltale dullness that means a piece will shear where asked. They built cribbing, stacks of timbers that rise in alternating layers to hold a weight that wants to lean. They slid wet levers under the belly of a block and eased it inward to a cradle of rope and wood. When the first pillar sighed and shifted, the sound of an enormous joint remembering it once moved, those on the ropes tightened shoulders, those setting wedges wetted them again, those guiding the fall breathed together so that the stone would learn their rhythm. When at last it lay on prepared rails, everyone in earshot felt the joy that meets a problem solved by patience. There are stories about winter work told with the pride of cold fingers. Winter ground is firm, the old people said, and sledges bite less when frost has sealed the green. The route down toward river or road is greasy even in summer. Wait for a hard skin and your runners will sing. So they left offerings for the hills, tidied the quarry face so it would not show torn flesh but a clean line, and turned to carpentry. Sledges were born, twin rails shaved smooth, crosspieces wedged and lashed, the whole smeared with fat so that even dry wood knew a little slipperiness. Ropes came from inner bark and twisted hair, from lime and willow and rawhide. The platter's fingers bled and smiled. Wooden rollers, if used, had their own tempo, but many preferred the wisdom of greased trackways. Short timbers laid ahead, lifted, relaid, a tide of surface under a swimmer who never sees the sea. Physics has its melodies. A heavy weight asks for a parbuckle, a trick where a rope slung under a cylinder doubles the power of a pull. A tricky slope asks for a strop and stake, a brake that bites when slack is taken up wrong. These were not theory, but practice taught by elder to youth beside a log, by trial that bruised shins and then stopped bruising because learning took. Those who have studied experiments in our time, moving stones by 100 hands in a good chorus, report the same discovery the old ones made. That song is a tool. When breath lines up between bodies, motion travels through the rope as consensus, and friction gives way. The descent from Preseli was slow but sure, and it was social. Every good halt for rest became a market and a wedding. Every village along a ridgeway learned faces by night fire. On some days, rain turned paths to purling streams, and two stout women walked the head of the sledge with hazel staves to test each step. On others, the air cleared to glass, and you could see the thin glitter of distant sea, as if someone had shaken a huge bowl of water and it had settled without a ripple. In hedges, birds scolded. In bracken deer flashed white rumps. In human throats, news rode. A child with a fever who recovered. A shoal of fish that rose into weirs like a gift. A new method for fixing a broken runner with a scarf joint and pins of green oak. There was a moment, told and retold, when the caravan reached the lip of a great river's estuary and felt the breath of tide. Here the stones met seaways that were as familiar to coastal families as chalk paths were to those from the plain. The people learned the rhythm of slack water as if it were a cure. They watched the tide climb a pole like a snake. They timed departure to ride the falling or the rising as a helper rather than a hindrance. Boats were not fragile guesses, but solid rafts and long hulls made from split trunks and sewn skins, lashed with quiet confidence, their seams greased against salt. Stone does not float, but a made thing can be made to carry it. This is the simple genius that couched human life by water, since water first was rowed. It is hard work to load a monolith without breaking the boat beneath it. Planks are braced, ribs wedged, the stone rolled down a carefully rocking ladder of timbers while ropes hum. The water noses the shore and tells the truth about weight. If the hull settles too hard, cargo is lightened, oars are added, outriggers extended like wings. The pilots who know the eyes of this coast, coves that wink safe or dangerous, reefs that grow teeth in particular winds, stand quiet and specify nothing but the necessary. On the long reach along the western sea, the stones laid low, lashed beneath nets of rope, and gulls cried over wakes that straightened as if the boats were drawing deliberate lines on the ocean's tablet. Where these boats turned inland is a matter that scholars debate and will continue to tune. The coast offers many mouths, and the land many throats. What matters to the story's breadth is that water bore weight for a good length and then gave it back to land with undamaged dignity. portages were made where water dwindled. Men and women moved in pairs and fours under yokes on travois-like drags, together at a rope, singing a measure that saved spines. At fords, the sledge floated briefly on men's thighs and then touched gravel again with a soft knock that made everyone smile. Years twined into the effort. The first stones reached friendly ground while the quarry still echoed. Later stones began the journey after children who had watched the first departure were already adults with their own questions. A landscape of chalk ridgeways welcomed the caravan as it turned east for the last time, back into white country, where the air felt wide and the sky made a clean ledger of day's measure. Travelers knew by a certain way fields gave underfoot that they had returned to a geology that simplifies engineering. Camps grew along dry valleys with names we cannot know. In the morning, white dust traced ankles and made even the darkest stone look rimmed with frost. People came out of their houses to see the famous loads from the west, and some reached a hand to touch and then drew it back out of respect, as one would with a sleeping animal. Where the river Avon widens and slows near meadows south of the chalk circle to be, the company found a bend that looked exactly like an embrace. The bank there is modest and thoughtful. Trees lean as if to listen. The current speaks in clean consonants. It made sense to set a ring by the water, a circle of bluestones whose feet could feel the river's pulse and whose faces would remember the shimmer. Holes were cut, their sides chalked smooth by hand, their bottoms lined with rammed chalk and timber pads. Stones stood and found their balance as a child finds her legs, swaying once and then settling into a seriousness that distinguishes a standing thing from a lying thing. Later ages would find only the holes and the bank around them, giving the place a second name, West Amesbury Henge, and guess from its scars that stones once stood where water bends. But for a time, dark uprights rose here, and the river learned to speak to them. Imagine a procession leaving boats at dusk, torches caged against wind, carrying ash and bone in bowls, walking up from the water into a ring that smelled faintly of sea on one side and faintly of chalk on the other. The circle by the river was a vestibule, a threshold between the known fluidity of water and the disciplined stillness of stone. It taught feet to slow and breathe. It taught the mind to hold two ideas without conflict, that the dead move on like currents, and that the dead stand near like pillars. In its curve, people rehearsed a turn that would become familiar when their path rose inland, along a straight drawn into the grass by many crossings. The beginning of a way some will later call the Avenue. There came a season when the people decided that stones by water should speak in the interior as well. The process is hard to picture without losing breath. To lower a set stone, treasured and named in a quiet way, and lay it back into the care of ropes. To walk it, not down the tide, but up toward that chalk ring where earth and ash had begun the grammar. This asked tenderness and daring. Yet the logic was sound. The circle inland had proved itself a flawless listener. Now it deserved an answer in hard, durable syllables. If they lifted 8 or a dozen or 20 from the riverside circle to give to the inner one, they did so with all the care that attends both a funeral and a birth. Within the chalk circle, the first bluestone settings were experiments spoken in arcs. Holes, later called the Q and R holes by eyes that love to name, were cut in paired runs just inside the line of the old bank, as if a beadwork of uprights might make a quiet second horizon. Then the plan shifted, and the holes were filled, and other holes cut nearer the center. Stones moved in double arcs, in ovals, in circles smaller than the ditch, like a sculptor walking around a block and trying angles with calm hands. No one was in a hurry, because the act of trying is itself a devotion. These movements left a faint chessboard of intentions in the chalk, and when rain came and darkened the backfilled patches, you could read the palimpsest like a kind letter stored in a sleeve. A bluestone is no giant. It stands in the height of a generous person, sometimes a little more, sometimes less, and its weight is as much as a dozen strong adults might lift if they had to, and if the gods were watching. But weight is not the same as presence. Set in a ring or a curve, these stones made a conversation of densities, chalk, air, dolerite, each conducting light in a different way, so that dawn arrived like a teacher moving from face to face in a classroom. Some stones were dressed with picks until facets caught the sun like scales. Others kept a skin rough as the hills that birthed them, a memory kept on purpose. On one or two, a notch or a scar hinted at an earlier life, perhaps an old mortise cut in another monument, perhaps an accident survived and cherished. If you ran a palm down a bluestone's flank, cool gathered under your hand the way shade gathers under leaves. There were stories about the virtues of these dark rocks. Later centuries, hungry for miracle, would call them healing, would say that to bathe water in their presence is to teach it to calm pain. We cannot see through time to know the precise beliefs of the first setters. What we can see is behavior, the care with which the stones were chosen, the insistence on their specific origin, the labor invested in their arrival. From such behavior, a fair inference follows that these stones carried a biography as recognizably meaningful as that of a person of renown. To have come from distant hills is a merit, not because distance implies magic, but because distance implies alliance. The ring gathered not just rocks from afar, but people from afar. In that gathering, a monument becomes a map without ink. Not everyone today agrees on the means of the bluestone's travel. Some geologists argue that ice and age could carry such boulders from Wales to Wessex, leaving them strewn as glacial erratics for later people to adopt. Others hold, with equal conviction and careful evidence, that the particular matches between Stonehenge's bluestones and specific outcrops, coupled with the scarcity of suitable erratics on the chalk, point to a human hand in every mile. The first story honors the power of ice, the second, the endurance of community. The old circle speaks kindly to both readings, but the tenor of the place, the rehearsed procession, the logic of the riverside circle, the petrological precision, leans the mind toward the pride of carried stone. Circle, the petrological precision, leans the mind toward the pride of carried stone. The social labor implied by these movements is a history in itself. To move even one pillar across fields and water is to make pacts with neighbors, to coordinate the calendars of households, to plan food, shelter, songs, and repairs, to distribute credit and hold a standard of fairness that keeps sweat sweet instead of sour. A great work can break a people if it is done for vanity. It can bind a people if it is done for shared meaning, seasoned by feasting and laughter, and the long courtesies of hospitality. The bluestone's arrival foreshadows the larger gatherings to come at a riverside town of timber, Durrington Walls, where meat from far valleys will be thrown on fires and winter mornings will smell of pork and wood smoke and cider sour apples. But that is a later chapter. For now, the quiet proof of coordination is written in dolerite's cool shadow on chalk. When the stones first stood within the earth ring, the northeast entrance framed them like a promise. On mornings when cloud lay low, The Bluestones made their own weather, dark beads against a white throat. On evenings when sun burned down into the chalk, the stones glowed inwardly as if lit through veins. People learned new choreographies. Children made a game of counting steps between uprights. Elders sat with backs against stone and felt their heartbeats match an older pulse that hills give to those who will sit long enough. Couples married by touching the same stone with joined hands. Mourners found the coolness good. The arrangement was not fixed because life was not fixed. A stone would be shifted a little to smooth the rhythm of a rite. Another would come down to travel from the river, and when it arrived, an older one would move to make room. The circle taught the kinds of compromise that do not feel like loss. The chalk remembered each position and, when asked later, would repeat it so that future hands could find confidence. This dialogue between intention and adaptation made the interior place not a plan imposed, but a plan discovered, which is always the stronger kind. Tool marks speak with a useful candor. On bluestone flanks, small pecked cups pattern in rows where hand-held mauls met stone in patient sequences. Tap, 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 shift, tap, tap, tap. The shallow scars fill with dew at dawn and turn into strings of quick stars for a minute before the sun lifts and drinks them. The pickers who made them taught their students to read the grain of dolerite, to rest often, to let tools be tools rather than clubs for arguments with geology. Now and then, a groove along an edge hints at earlier joints. Evidence perhaps of a life before this life, a hint of recycling that shows thrift and reverence twined together. With the bluestones in place, the interior felt like a lung that had learned to draw air more deeply. The solstitial line, that old long chord the earth circle had already suggested, grew more legible. Stand in the mouth of the northeast gap and look toward the center, and you see not a single target, but a sequence of invitations. Ditch, bank, dark uprights, a clean space beyond that asks for something taller and bolder to frame it. To watch the sun come and go along this axis is to watch the earth's tilt whisper plainly to those who care to hear. The plain is not superstitious. It is attentive. The people are not credulous. They are precise in the ways that matter. Beyond the circle in West Woods, great sarsens lay and stood under leaf, gray Titans with skin dappled by lichen. Some lay half-buried like sleeping cattle. Some leaned on companions with a comradely patience. Almost any would do to make a gate that a sunbeam could walk through like a guest of honor. But the people did not rush to give the circle its crown. They watched the bluestones through seasons the way one watches a child learn a language, delighted by each competence, but careful not to put too much on the tongue too quickly. When winter came, the stones took hoarfrost like lace. When summer came, they radiated a cool that made toddlers press cheeks to them and giggle. Years passed, and one evening the air in the circle thickened with the feeling of threshold. It came without fanfare, a shift of wind from south to east, a cloud that broke exactly where it should to throw a rectangular light on a patch of chalk, a murmur in the crowd that felt like recognition. The bluestones, marvelous as they were, looked not incomplete, but awaiting companionship. The labor that had moved them had also moved minds, and minds began to draw not just curves, but trilithons, two uprights and a crosspiece on the inside of eyelids before sleep. A gate wants a guest. Had you been there, you might have noticed odd tasks beginning in corners, ropes tested beyond what bluestones asked of them, wooden tenons carved as demonstration pieces, scaffold poles sorted by length and straightness, pits trial dug and lined in the old way, but larger as if speaking to a heavier future. Elders told stories about how a lintel might lock into its uprights so that a wind would toy with it and fail. Youths took turns with pecking stones on slabs of sarsen brought from a day's fetch to learn the difference between blue and pale hardness. The circle of bluestones did not dim under this attention. It shone more, an orchestra pleased to accompany a soloist still walking up the aisle. One last time, before the great lifting began, the people walked from the river circle, now thinned because some of its stones had gone inland, up along the shaping avenue to the bank and ditch, and walked within the bluestones as dusk gathered. They brought water from the Avon in small jars and dashed it lightly at the feet of the dark stones, a returning of the source as thanks. They set down bowls of grain and slices of meat, not because stones eat, but because the act of offering binds the offerer into a seriousness that magnifies skill. They spoke little. The circle was quiet as a mouth that has just learned a secret and is savoring its taste. No one ever finishes the breath that began when the first pick entered chalk. It lengthens through generations, held in the belly as a strength. The Bluestones' journey had taught the community the scope of their own patience and the reach of their friendships. It had braided coasts into downs, hills into rivers, and stories into places in a way that would be readable by feet long after names vanished. Now the circle waited at the lip of a new chapter. To the west, under trees, giants of sarsen shifted in their sleep. To the east, the sky measured itself against an idea. Between them stood a ring of dark stones, murmuring in a language the new stones would understand. The breath paused once more, sweet and steady, before the plain learned how to lift the sun on a crafted crown. They had learned to breathe with bluestone, to set weight into chalk with the patience of those who understand that rhythm is a tool. Now the plain asked for a deeper chord. In the cool hush after sunset, when the dark uprights kept their quiet counsel, a rumor moved through the camp like a low, good note. The giants under leaf would wake. Not the far, sea-touched pillars that had tasted salt, but nearer colossi whose bellies pressed the earth within a day's walk of the circle. The thought did not startle. It settled. A gate wants a guest, and the Bluestones waited like an orchestra, ready for the soloist to arrive and take the line of light in hand. The place of giants lay under trees, a high wood where sunlight sifted green and birds spoke in half-questions. Stones there were not shy. Some lay like cows in long rest, rimmed with moss, their backs scrolled by lichen. Some shouldered each other like brothers at a door too narrow. The people who read rock, who could tell a stone's mood from the tone of a tap, walked among them with a craftsman's tenderness. You learn a piece of wood by its grain, a piece of bone by its density, a piece of rope by its twist. In the same way, you learn a sarsen by its skin and its reply. When a hammerstone, another boulder used as a tool, met a candidate with a measured knock, the sound came back not hollow and not choked, but full, as if the block had room inside its strength. Historians note that most of Stonehenge's great pale stones can be traced to the chalk's edge north of the circle to a tract of high woodland where sarsen nodules once lay like a harvest waiting. The makers did not quarry in neat steps so much as persuade the earth to let go. A boulder part buried would be undercut with wedges and levers. Cribbing of timber would hold its flank while the soil was brushed and scooped from beneath. Then the weight would settle into a prepared cradle like an animal lowering itself to sleep. The first time a giant shifts, the ground speaks through your feet. Men and women on the ropes lean into that speech, shoulders humming with the truth of Mass, and a great slab turns from a thing the land owns to a thing the people must keep faith with. These Saracens asked for carpentry, stone handled as if it were seasoned oak. The first work was dressing, reducing awkward shoulders, taking off bosses, easing edges to curves that would agree with the ring to come. Hammerstones sat in heaps like river eggs. When swung with patience, they left pecked pocks across the surface, a stipple that caught light like frost. Under certain hands, faces began to plane. Under others, edges slimmed to a slight taper so that an upright would look straight to the eye, even as it leaned inward a whisper, taught by builders who knew that perfect plumb can make a structure feel stiff, while a breath of lean makes it seem to draw toward its center. To turn stones into companions, you must plan for how they will meet. The uprights learned tenons at their crowns, proud knobs raised from the living rock. The lintels learned mortices, neat cups sunk into their undersides to receive those knobs. Between lintel and lintel, the masons cut a tongue-and-groove seam, so that each cap gripped its neighbor like clasped hands, preventing sideways mischief when wind scoured the plain. This is wood knowledge played in a harder key. It meant that when the ring of caps was finally laid, it would be a locked crown, not a chain of independence. No one spoke an engineer's jargon, yet everyone moved like one, testing tolerances with fingers, feeling whether a tenon's shoulder would seat cleanly, shaving a mortise until the fit was tight enough to click, but not so tight as to crack. How to carry such weight from wood to chalk. Here, the distance was mercy, not menace. The path was a chalk road, firm in summer dust or winter frost. Sledges bigger than any used for bluestone were built from heartwood, their crosspieces scarfed and pegged, their runners shod with raw hide and greased fat. Ropes were laid up in coils thick as a child's thigh. Stakes were made like an alphabet around which rope could be read. Here you cinched to break, here you snubbed to rest, here you take a bite and sing. Hundreds came to the hall, not commanded, but convened. When the call went around, tomorrow we move the North Giant, families adjusted meal pots and turned up at first light, because to watch the impossible become ordinary is a privilege you do not give away. The ground writes its own advice. Routes were walked in advance, bad patches noted with a stick pressed into mud, dips packed with brush. At slopes, the craft leaders set parbuckles, ropes looped around the stone and over poles so that a measured pull rolled the load over itself rather than dragging it raw. When a bank steepened, an A-frame of lashed timbers rose like a letter against the sky, block and tackle doubling the pull of a line of backs. These are modern names for old wisdom. The people kept the names in muscle instead. Children learned by standing near their mother's knees and copying breath. Pull on the out-breath, then let the rope creep, and not snatch on the in, so the sledge glides and the pegs hold. At the circle, holes waited like open mouths. They were deep and particular, their profiles scooped with intents. A near vertical back where the upright would stand, a sloped ramp on the approach side where the foot of the stone would slide down into its seat. At the base, a stone bed of packed chalk and small blocks arranged like knuckles to take shock without bruising. On lift day, 2 weathered elders would walk the circuit and lay a palm on each socket's rim, a benediction without words that reminded everyone this was not simply a feat, but a promise. When the sledge arrived, it came to rest with a soft thud that traveled through ground and body both, as if the earth sighed to feel the next part near. Raising an upright asks for choreography. The sledge's nose rested at the lip of the pit. ropes ran over a high gin of timbers and back to teams of haulers. A rope harness kissed the stone 2/3 of the way up, so that the pull found the right leverage. Oak chocks waited at heel and flank. Watchers posted at every corner were empowered to cry halt, and when they did, all obeyed without pride. On the leader's low count, 1 for the breath, 2 for the set, 3 for the pull, the teams leaned. The foot slid. Chalk hissed. The giant pivoted around its belly with the reluctance of a stubborn but intelligent creature. The A-frame creaked like a ship. The lines thrummed as if a harp had grown in the middle of the plain. On a good day, the stone stood in a single, long movement. On a complicated day, it rose in inches, chalked and wedged and cajoled. Either way, when at last it settled upright and the line went slack, the quiet was not emptiness, but fullness, a bowl brimming with relief and gratitude. Packing the socket is work of love. Chalk rubble goes in first, then flint nodules that bite, then more chalk. Each layer rammed with poles, each addition tested by hand against the upright's flank. The stone is coaxed to lean a finger's breadth toward the circle's heart, a posture that reads as attention rather than indifference. A string is sighted from base to crown to check for twist. A pick strikes the tenon to sound whether it sits tight and true. The leader's ear reports the note. Good. All this is done with faces shining and shirts dark at the back, with children bringing water, with old ones nodding as if remembering a story they love. If uprights are the work of a day with a history, lintels are the day a village talks about for a year. To lift a cap, you must first raise the ground. Earthen ramps are thrown up against the flanks of the pair of uprights wide enough to carry a platform, strong enough to accept a sledge. The lintel, dressed with a gentle curve so that many such stones will agree to meet in a true circle, is hauled up the slope like a patient animal. When it reaches a height at which its mortises kiss the tenons without insult, men with long poles and women with careful eyes guide it down. The moment of seating is a hush. The tenon's head finds the mortise's cup, slides, resists, and then clicks with a sound you feel across your ribs. If a chalk must be knocked, a boy with a mallet will do it, and the whole ring will grin to hear that knock, because it is the knock of the rightness that comes after long labor. The lintel's neighbors wait their turn, each shaped with that tiny inward taper that fools the eye and delights it, each meeting its fellows in a tongue that will not let go. When the third or fourth cap finds its place, people standing at a distance begin to see the whole, to fit in the mind the idea that a ring of stone can carry a ring of stone, and it does not break them, it steadies them. The crown grows around like a necklace that is its own clasp. No one rushes the final joints. A single high stone within the central horseshoe, the tallest of the coming 5 trilithons, asks for a cap like a lintel and carries it like a king carries a promise. Not for show, but because the pledge is heavier when the world can see it. The inner trilithons lift their gates in a horseshoe, tall in the west and stepping down toward the entrance like a phrase descending a scale. Each pair is a relationship. 2 uprights with shoulders cut to hold, a lintel proportioned to span, a geometry that feels truer to hearts than to numbers. The great one, its back to the southwest, its face to the northeast, frames the axis that the earth circle had already whispered. To stand under that arch is to feel a door between seasons swing open and shut without ever closing you out. Even those who measure nothing feel the hinge in their bones. Outside, the ring of 30 sarsen uprights and their 30 lintels encircle the horseshoe with the calm of a finished sentence. The count is not a superstition, it is a music. Between each upright runs a gap through which you read the world, a strip of sky, a line of grass, the face of a neighbor. The ring does not cage, it conducts. When a cloud crosses the sun in a slow game of hide-and-seek, shadows of uprights stride across chalk like tall, quiet people. When sunlight returns, the lintel ring glows as if the sky had agreed to wear a crown. Beyond the circle, a single great stone stands like an envoy. It is set in the direction the people love to greet, at the point of longest day, and it refuses polish, holding its roughness like a credential. This is the heel stone, unshaped but not unpurposed, an exclamation at the beginning of a sentence the crown will finish. Some say it stood before the ring, some say it was moved to please the new geometry. The stone does not argue, and the people are content to let multiple truths keep one another company. What matters is how the eye, standing in the northeast entrance, uses that rough pillar as a finger to point at the dawn, and how the trilithons answer with a frame for the opposite fire at the year's other hinge. The line through the circle's heart is not a rumor anymore. It is architecture. Midsummer sunrise walks up the avenue of air, nods at the heel stone, threads the entrance like a needle through the eye of a story, touches the lintel crown, and then slips into the open mouth between the high uprights as if greeted by name. Midwinter sunset, longed for and kind, does the reverse. It slides toward the great western trilithon and goes to ground there with a dignity that feels like mercy. Archaeological findings suggest that the winter rite mattered keenly here. Meat salted and smoked, hands held out to low sun, a gold that blesses hardship. But the circle never grew doctrinaire. The same geometry permits both ceremonies, and a community that expects to live long expects to need both boldness and endurance. From the crown a processional way unspools, not a guess, but a paired bank and ditch that leave their pale scars across grass. It falls from the entrance, bends with a grace that the river will understand, and then takes a long straight toward the water, whose surface remembers all faces. People follow its pale corridor as if the ground itself were a guide, and somewhere under the turf, ancient stripes of frost-disturbed chalk run in near-solar lines as if the land had been marked by ice long before anyone dreamed of cutting a route. And the makers, attending to what was already there, took that hint and made it human-readable. The avenue is a stitching, a seam between places, a way to turn procession into teaching and teaching into the habit of returning. Work leaves traces beside stone. In pits and hollows around the site lie hundreds of mauls, broken hammer stones that spent themselves pecking and dressing and now sit like worn-out animals, happy to rest. In the chalk are struck flakes that fit back to faces as neatly as a leaf fits back to its twig, a jigsaw that proves how intentionally these surfaces were made. In the sockets are packing stones, chosen not only for function, but for the elegance of a wedge that takes just the right slice, as if the builders could not help marrying strength with beauty. Archaeologists who trace those traces speak softly, because soft speech is right for patient things. The community that lifted the crown did not lift with backs only. They lifted with order. Food moved like music. Large joints roasted at the periphery where smoke would not dull the eye. Grain ground where wind could take the chaff. Children fed first. Elders seated where they could see the silhouettes of working teams and judge when to call rest. People arrived from far hills and nearer farms, their accents strolling beside them. Strangers were strangers only until a rope needed more hands, and then they were kin, because sweat, is a quick marriage. Disputes did not stop the lift. They were postponed with the dignity of a boulder placed aside and returned to later with a patience that moving heavy things teaches. When at last the crown closed, when the final lintel's tongue kissed its neighbor's groove, and the join disappeared into a single curve, the plain learned a new silence. It was not emptiness. It was the quiet of a task exactly finished, of a number arriving at itself without remainder. People stood alone in the interior and felt a change in how the sky behaved. The dome no longer wandered into vagueness, but took its place inside a frame where the human hand, without insolence, asked the world to be legible. This is not mastery. This is companionship with sky and season. The circle does not make the sun rise where it rises. It gives the rising a house of attention. In the days that followed, the bluestones were invited to new positions, shifted into an inner oval and horseshoe that conversed with the big trilithons. Their dark skins sat kindly beneath the pale caps, as if river and rock had agreed to share the same sentence. The old Q and R holes were backfilled. New sockets received small uprights. Resettings taught everyone that permanence in this place is not stasis, but the stability of a riverbank that changes grain by grain, and yet remains the bank. If anyone worried that moving a stone dishonored the labor that set it, the circle answered by being better, more musical, more articulate, more exact, after each thoughtful adjustment. What do you do with a complete instrument? You play it. Rites gathered themselves to the ring. Weddings spoke vows under lintels. Funerals carried ash to bluestone feet. Winter feasts, large, savory, communal, warmed cold mornings until breath steamed like incense. Walkers approached along the avenue, and when they reached the entrance, dropped their voices as if entering a friend's house by habit. A child tracing a finger along a joint in the cap said, "Why is it like wood?" And an old woman laughed softly and said, "Because we cannot help being ourselves even in stone." The new architecture taught this, that identity built over generations in timber and chalk can translate into rock without losing tenderness. The heel stone kept its rough watch, and beyond it, summer dawn rehearsed the trick it loves, not simply rising, but rising in a place where eyes can meet it decisively. People lined the avenue's banks, width, and looked as one body. The light found the gap, found the ring, found the trilithon, and reached toward faces tilted up. Some wept, some laughed, some stood as if at attention for an honored guest. Later, in deep winter, when the world thinned and hunger pricked at patience, the sun went to its bed behind the big western gate, and people groaned with a pleasure that sounded like relief. Between the hinges of year, the crown turned work into ceremony, and ceremony into courage. The builders understood that a great work's health lies not only in itself, but in its neighborhood. A route now tied the sarsen ring to water. Along that route, other sites, timber and earth, cast their voices back and forth. In the distance, across the river, the southern circle in timber learned the winter sun, as the stone ring learned the summer. Farther yet, houses clustered in a great enclosure where animal bones from distant pastures told of feasts that drew people from the whole island. The web thickened. The plain, already a palimpsest, became a score for antler and rope and drum and fire, a composition anyone could join by walking the routes with respect. From time to time repair happened, and it did not shame the makers. A lintel that settled at a corner was jacked with a lever and chalked. A packing stone that crushed was replaced. A scar was dressed until it shone with new pecking. Maintenance is a kind of devotion that flatters no one and honors everyone. The malls broke one by one and left their round bodies in pits, as if to say, "We gave what was needed. Now let us rest where we always wanted to be, with our backs to chalk looking up at sky." None of this erased the older grammar of earth and ash. The ditch still gleamed when swept. The bank still caught the last light with an affectionate shoulder. The ring of cremation still held families together below the turf. The new crown did not replace, it amplified. When you walked from the ditch's white floor to the foot of a trilithon, you felt history as a gradient, not a set of boxes. Your feet told you what came first, not because someone said so, but because the ground had more to say in one place than another, and the human body is the best instrument for that music. One evening, after the last tool had been put away and the last line coiled, smoke rose from fires down by the river, and a music traveled up the avenue that did not sound like work at all. It had the bright cadence of laughter around meat, and the steady beat of many feet learning the same step. The stone ring had learned to speak in light. Now it would learn to answer to living voices. News went around like bread. Down at the great riverside enclosure there were houses, many and snug. There was a timber circle that stood like a warm brother to the cold crown. There were dishes full of winter and stories that did not know the word for small. The last rays slid along the lintel ring as if pointing the way. Those standing in the entrance looked from heelstone to sky to the pale track leading east, and then they turned toward the murmur of a town whose fires embroidered the river with gold. The crown had closed, and the lintels knew their neighbors. The pale ring breathed with the slow confidence of a task completed. Yet when dusk lay down along the avenue and the river's murmuring came up like a polite guest, another sound rose to answer it: laughter, kettles rattling, dogs disputing scraps, children shrieking at a game that required nothing but legs and dusk. Follow that sound over the swell of ground, and you come to a place that is not a monument, but a town in season, a city by the standards of those who measure wealth as full fires and full bellies and full histories told to wide eyes. Here the living gathered to honor the hinges of the year. Here wood stood where stone stood elsewhere, and the river stitched them into one story. Durrington Walls is a circle of earth so large the mind takes a moment to seat it. A bank rises, white where fresh chalk shows through, a shoulder the wind leans against before it crosses the plain to Stonehenge. Inside the bank a ditch runs, broad and deep enough that a dozen people could walk along its floor and feel small. Entrances cut the circle like careful invitations. From the southeastern side, a broad way slides down toward the River Avon, a pale road pressed by many feet, a way that morning light loves. The enclosure quivers with industry, smoke from hearths, steam from cooking pits, the sweet animal smell of hides turned on pegs, the clack of pot against pot. The houses here are square and sensible. Think of rooms about the size of a good yoke span, 5 paces by 5, laid out in ranks so that tracks between them become streets by use. Floors are tamped chalk that hold prints as faint gloss. At the center of each room, a hearth sits in a low ring of stone, the smoke finding the door when the door is left ajar, and only coughing when a north wind tests it. The walls stand from stake holes and trenches where timber sills sit. Reeds and withies and daub make the skin of the home. Against one wall, a platform of timber to roll a child's blanket and a hunter's cloak. Against another, a shelf of flat stones where cups sit and bowls that smell faintly of grain. Outside, Middens begin to rise like little hills that glint with grooved ware sherds, pottery with incised lines and dimples, and the memory of hands that pressed white paste into the cuts so patterns would brighten in firelight. Some houses are plainly domestic, the crook of a sleeping child's arm, a dog undecided between bark and wag, while others are workrooms where bone becomes awls and needles. Antler is sawn into chalk picks, and flint flashes blue as blades are struck from cores. A few dwellings feel ceremonial, floors swept to a shine, hearths fed with chosen woods, walls hung with shell or red ochred patterns. Walk the lanes at evening, and the settlement hums. A man sharpening and humming back, a woman laughing as she kneads, a child teaching a younger cousin a game as if instruction were a kind of song. The river is close enough to taste. At the end of the Durrington Avenue, twin banks descend like a tidy sentence to the Avon's punctuation. The water keeps its own ornaments, polished landings, a platform for watching the year's long trick of light. At midwinter dawn, when breath hangs like vows, the avenue points to the sun as if it knows a secret name. Beside it stands the southern circle, posts thick and tall in rings within rings, greeting winter sunrise and summer sunset with such precision that a crowd first hushes, then breaks into sound. Deep post holes cup the earth like old hands, not fences, but devices for attention, training bodies to stand where light lands. On a low terrace, later called Woodhenge, an oval of posts once stood straight as a choir. A small burial there, tender, mysterious, reminds all that celebration keeps a seat for grief. Warm, dark timbers across the Avon answer the pale, cool stones at the great ring. Between them, the river runs as boundary and bridge. Many say wood is for the living, stone for the ancestors. The water teaches how to cross without forgetting which shore raised you. If this place favors any season, the bones insist it is winter. In middens and pits, pig jaws cluster at 9 to 10 months, spring born, cold season culled, meat fat with the year's forgiving. Cut marks read like a manual, joints split clean on practiced angles, marrow cracked with a single smart blow, feet cooked and gnawed with communal zeal that remembers children. Many beasts walked far. Tooth enamel keeps signatures of distant waters. Read the strontium, and it points west, north, and to sea-washed coasts. The feasts were island-wide invitations. Yet a winter feast is more than meat and drink. It is logistics, choreography, law. A man from the west drives pigs for weeks. A woman from the north unwraps a firm cheese. Another from the south lifts a chevron-banded beaker. A youth from the east carries a story so well learned that listeners mouth the words with him. Hospitality is currency. Grooved ware bowls circulate not only stew but reputation, whose seasoning sang, whose pot cracked from hurry, who must share because hungry gods watch greed most closely. This is votive craft, not glut. While the stone crown rose across the river, people here hauled, levered, and tied by day, and slept with usefully tired shoulders by night. They needed a place for fair division of meat, for trading and mending tools, for proposing marriages under a winter sky, and a timber circle that nodded to dawn. They needed counterpoint, wood that warms and bends and burns, stone that cools and stands and receives the sun's sternness like a compliment. Between them, meaning holds steady without being forced into one chair. From the water, a palisade guides like a shepherd, presence, not blows. The avenues here and at the stone ring are lanes for thought and for feet, trained to carry flame, ash, and story. Stand on Durrington's chalk bank, and you can almost see the pale vein of the Stonehenge Avenue across the fields. the two routes yearning toward each other like hands about to meet. Far beyond the houses, a subtle ring of vast shafts sleeps in the earth. Filled now, they hide their mouths. Once they were 10 paces across and deep enough to lower a child by rope to the cool. Their circle spans 2,000 steps, wide enough to walk in the time it takes to tell a beloved's life. Purpose is guessed, a boundary to keep processions true, a warning that bends feet toward the proper gait, a skin around a beating heart to keep wildness at distance. It feels less like a wall than a spell that works only if you consent. The living are not all local, and the air brightens with accents. From the hill where the sun falls into the sea, says one. From the valley where the river chews chalk to sweetness, says another. It is a federation without counsel, ruled by the politeness hard work teaches. A stranger is strange for a day and kin by the week, proved by back, by pot, by joke, and by the willingness to set your feet where an elder indicates so old ground won't be offended. Morning rites are serious. Winter light arrives not as a shout, but as a breath. The dark posts take it on their eastern faces like opened hands. People stand shoulder to shoulder through the gap, sharing warmth. The sun threads the entrance and strikes the same floor spot so often that chalk there has turned into a history of gazes. In the quiet, a low chant begins, syllables the circle knows, though none recall who composed them. This is not spectacle, it is maintenance, oil for the hinge. By noon the settlement crackles. Flint knappers crouch by hearths, chalk platforms speckled with bright confetti that could be puzzled back into a core. Children collect long slivers for needles and short ones for scrapers. Someone finds a blade that sings a better note against wood, and apprenticeship happens knee to knee with laughter and exasperation mixed. Bone workers drill antler into whistles for dogs, or dawn. Potters score quick lines in clay and lift bowls to the fire's lip. A woman retwists a rope, wrist and thumb, conversing with fiber until it grows dependable. Evenings rehearse the river passage. Torches learn to breathe behind wicker guards. Drums test slow beats that carry over open ground. Voices begin low and climb as harmonies find the skull's echo. Children learn order by following cousins, taking an aunt's hand when steps falter, laughing at the stumble, and trying again. Here, order is not punishment. It is the art that turns many into one body. When the signal day arrives, midwinter by the bite in your nose, the crunch underfoot, the sun's brief noon, the town is ready. Fires burn low and steady on saved wood. Meat set at dawn sighs its fat by dusk, the smell drifting like a promise. People bare heads and close mouths in the southern circle. They watch the light climb and turn through the gap. As it slides and begins to go, the settlement rises, the river glitters, and the avenue between wood and water becomes a current of people. Along that living river vessels pass hand to hand, bowls of stew, cups warm and sharp, beakers that will one day carry new drinks across the island, copper winking on belts and dagger hilts. The soft clink writes a small jewelry of sound. In it you can hear a style arriving that does not threaten the old but sits beside it, like a young singer waiting respectfully beside an elder. Builders of patient works are patient with change. At the landing, torchlight nets the Avon, and the river looks like a creature breathing. Boats nudge the bank. Boards shine with many winters of feet. People bring bowls of ash from houses where the dead were remembered in wood-world ways. They tip them into the current with the sound of slow torn paper. The pause is for the living. Ceremony coats grief so it will not harden the heart. Others dip hands and touch cold to brow and breast, blessing with something too clean to own. Then upstream and across, along the familiar Stonehenge Avenue, banks bright in moonlight, hoarfrost like old bone. The heel stone stands like a doorkeeper grown gentler each year. Inside the crown is an old coolness. Blue stones darken as if freshly rained upon. Trilithons lift square mouths to drink dusk. Here the living bring the wisdom of meat and smoke and children's songs. The dead, or their idea, bring the wisdom of quiet and long lines. Both sit together in a truce that is not ceasefire, but friendship. Homeward the feast opens its arms. The midden swells. Dogs nose and are scolded. Fires are fed. Pots threaten to boil. Pigs from west and north roast to the same tenderness. Equality by flame. A woman tells of a deep snow and burning dung cleanly. A man brings a knuckle-bone game that makes stern elders laugh. A boy cuts raggedly, then finds rhythm. An uncle nods. Stiff fingers warm. Silence speaks beside talk. After eating, futures are built in work talk. Bring antler picks again? Let the Bend Grove rest. Try the copse near the old barrow. The rains taught the ropes. Closer twist, dry before hauling. A fix paid for in one field becomes doctrine in another. Stonehenge's manual is written in soup and song. Between such sentences there is tenderness. A blanket over a sleeping child. A sore hand bound in softened leather. A friend quiet long enough to share the weight of winter loss. This, too, is architecture. A net of care that leaves no post hole, yet holds a town. Dawn after feast smells of cold ash and satisfaction. Smoke trails blue and low. Pots are upturned. Dogs lick grease and forecast weather with their tails. Some stay, tending fires and tools, mending the avenue where frost heaves chalk, watching the river for first green. Many go to fields and flocks. They carry the taste of midwinter and the sense of belonging to something living in more than one place. Upriver, a timber platform reaches over deeper water where salmon rise in season. A girl and her father read eddies as kinds of time. Slow behind a post, quick in the race, foamy where speeds disagree. The river, he says, is a book without binding. Start at different pages if you're hungry, in love, or wordlessly troubled. She thinks of timber ring and stone crown, and knows they are books too, open, revised, unowned. The avenues will learn more feet. The crown will endure. The town will cycle through flourish and quiet, and flourish again. A rhythm, legible in ash, sherd, and bone. One evening, a stranger arrives with a glint not of stone, a small wealth ringing in a new key. Ears prick for networks beyond these rivers, hints that cups and blades may soon bring other habits into these lanes. No one panics. They have built with confidence. Novelty, like a lintel, is welcomed with patience and fit. At day's last light, the bank glows like a slow river. A mother lifts a child toward the pale horizon where the lintel ring is a rumor and says, "We belong to that as much as it belongs to us." Across the Avon the stones catch a thread of sunset and hold it to bone, then dark. Night between places is not separation. It is a nap taken by a story sure of waking. He comes to us in the hush after solstice, when the lintel crown still tastes of light and the avenue is pale with remembered feet. Amesbury Archer, the traveler with gifts, stone and metal touching elbows in one grave. I see a careful smile, a knee taught by pain to endure, a hand fluent in flint's bright kiss and copper's quiet authority. Around him the soil opens like a cabinet, beaker pots chevroned for the fingers, wrist guards for the bow, barbed and tanged arrowheads dozing like patient wolves, copper knives that drink light differently, two soft sighs of gold. Later minds read his teeth and hear mountain water, an alpine rumor written in enamel, and I imagine him teaching a youth to braid old and new, flint for this, copper for that, fitness over pride. The landscape learns that grammar, too. Ridges flower with round barrows, full moons on stems, at Normanton Down, King Barrow Ridge, the Cursus, single mounds and clustered kinships, each a held breath that keeps names from slipping. Across the river, a beaker cup warms in firelight like a lesson, its pattern teaching that rhythm can be touched. Within the great stone circle, the bluestones shift, ovals, horseshoes, small rings, as a family tries chairs for winter. On low suns, sarsen faces show shallow processions of axes and daggers, metal outlined on stone, as if the lintels were learning a new word. Nearby, the Boscombe bowmen lie with western water in their bones. On Normanton, down the bush barrow, chieftain rises with a gold lozenge that tames light, a dagger once seeded with thousands of hair-fine studs, a stone mace head capped in gilt, the quiet of mastery. Between archer and chieftain stretches not a wall but a learning, smelting, alloying, casting, riveting, measuring by eye and finger until ideas obey metal. Trade, marriage, apprenticeship carry cups and blades along routes first taught by pig drives and rope hauls. The circle, unjealous, remains a forum where new brightness asks old light for judgment. Trumpet changes blaze, gold on chest, bronze in hand. Others drift in like fog, migrations braided into fashion, beaker as cup and lineage, tongues swapping small vowels and large courtesies. The chalk records the aftermath, new grave goods, fresh constellations of barrows that recalibrate views of the ring. The heel stone keeps its rough finger. The avenue stays a corridor for dawn and dusk. Outside the sarsen ring, the Y and Z holes appear like plans that sensibly paused, empty chalk cups reminding us that even certainties begin as experiments. Inside, rites adjust the furniture without quarreling with the house. A boy touches stone, then metal, then stone again. A woman sets a beaker and a bright blade at a foot of rock and whispers to ash, "You would have liked this new brightness." Marriages breathe in the square of air beneath the tallest trilithon and learn to begin at the true scale of sky. The barrows teach map reading with shins, left rise, long dip, short tug, until the plane is rhythm, not diagram. Craft stays intimate, wrist guards drilled by ears that hear danger in pitch, lozenges beaten thin enough to move with breath, a copper dagger learned kindly. Do not strike stone, sharpen with stone, cut meat and hide, keep dry. Markets glitter with amber, spiral shells, jet polished to river black. Accents move like starlings, and the stones practice patience. One drought and the chalk inhales. Parch marks trace lost sockets and pale lines. Even the avenue winks. I am here with or without rain. Children find animals in clouds between bluestones. An elder whispers the ditch's old names. Both are maintenance, because attention is the only fuel that doesn't run out. Years edge forward. Carvings deepen under fingers. The Y and Z circles green over. The plane composes itself for a slower key. Now the lintel ring learns to live with men who measure before they forgive. Inigo Jones, classicist with a ruler, imagines a Roman temple on a chalkland sentence, wrong usefully, teaching an anxious age to look for order without fear. John Aubrey, gentle note-taker, stoops to trace freckles of chalk others trample. The small cups he records, later called Aubrey holes, return to speech because he looked kindly, long. William Stukeley, druid dreamer, walks the avenue like a living thing and draws serpents and saints. His errors are generous, keeping attention warm. Through farms and wars the stones taste scaffolds and levers. A fallen upright learns the square insistence of a crowbar. After a harder war, William Hawley opens neat rectangles and reads layers like scripture. Earth circle, bluestone experiments, sarsen crown. Less I found than I listened, which is how chalk prefers confession. Richard Atkinson follows, ordering phases, dating with his day's tools, telling lintel and tenon stories to a nation, right enough that later kindness can correct him. New eyes arrive that do not cut. Aerial photographs sketch pale rings, magnetometry and resistivity here buried ditches. LiDAR combs light and returns shave contours, an avenue turning toward water as if it had never stopped walking. The story steps out of the single ring to stand among neighbors. Timber circles greeting winter dawn. Across the river, a ghost town of houses and hearths reassembles from data. At the Avon bend, the negative of a circle fogs the glass. Bluestonehenge, the water gate, holes that held and released, proof that river and ring shared one conversation. Field seasons pour tea and optimism into weather and come back with choreography that was always here. Wood for the living, stone for the ancestors, winter gathered in timber, summer concentrated in sarsen. A line between water and crown walked so often it became a nerve. Paper joins chalk. World Heritage writes Stonehenge, Amesbury, and the tissues between into a ledger of obligations. Stewards learn the hard music of access and keeping. Ropes, sight lines, buses, fences, road arguments, a shy visitor center. Litter set down, lifted, love made infrastructural. The oldest music persists. At midsummer, sunrise walks the axis and taps the crown like a friendly hand. At midwinter, the western trilithon receives the sun with mercy older than speech. Cloaks and smartphones see the same gold. Quarrels about drumming and silence settle as bodies drift toward warmth. Droughts still draw pale ropes from grass. Floods darken the ditch's lungs. A ranger's boot on a bank reminds us guardianship is a posture. A farmer leans on a gate while geophysicists pace and smile like children learning to hear underground. In labs, small sciences keep time with the big circle. A sarsen thin section sings West Woods. A rhyolite sliver winks Craig Rhos-y-felin. A curl of cremated bone is lifted like a moth and testifies to deliberate fire. A line in Aubrey or Stukeley clicks into a modern argument. Myth's promenade, giants with sacks, Merlin's ruse, Romans claiming what they did not raise, a farmer with 3 horses, and wit. The stones listen politely and answer with the same unanswerable solstice trick. One ordinary night, precious because it is ordinary, a few people sit lawfully by the rope with scarves and thermoses. Frost turns grass to tin filings. Someone reads a trench report. Someone points out Orion. Someone quotes a grandmother. You hear better when there is noise. The heelstone keeps paranoid generosity, guarding the possibility that strangers may behave as kin. Just before light, the plain thins to its keenest attention. Barrows hunch like shoulders under a blanket. The ring is almost hypothetical, and then itself again. In that thinness, centuries fold like paper cranes. Bodies remember what minds cannot shelve. Calves knowing the avenue's iambic. Palms recalling grit and rope and the click of a tenon seating. Lungs practiced in reviving embers. It is not sentiment to say the ancestors are present. It is physiology, knowledge kept in muscle and passed as choreography rather than law. East brightens from thought to thread. Heads rise as if tugged on one cord. The heel stone points, the gap admits, the crown frames, and the sun turns stones and people into one instrument that plays the oldest sentence. We gathered, we kept faith, we learned to look together. Later, there are buses and rappers, a shy ditch asking respect, a lab result closing a debate, a kettle singing while someone thinks of shaving a lintel a hair so the eye will call it straight. Ask why it matters. Archer and chieftain, beakers and bowmen, carvings and Y and Z, antiquaries and trenches, geophysics and parchmarks, heritage and winter breath. And I'll point down the avenue. Here attention became architecture. Grief walked beside feast. Change spoke through continuity. The sky grew legible without being owned. If, far off, a last lintel should tire and rest, the avenue will still be habit in grass. The river will still remember the hand it held. Barrows will still count like beads. Children will still lift white fossils and know they live on seabed-bearing sky. Lovers will still stand in the gap and feel that third presence, not God, not law, not memory exactly, but the good things stones and people make together, and the sun will still take the long walk north, the long walk south, and the plain will still make room.